He never hit me. But somehow, he managed to break me piece by piece, until I couldn't recognize myself anymore. It started with a smile. God, that smile. The kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. The kind that promised safety, passion, and forever, all in one glance. His name was Ethan. He was charismatic, witty, and somehow knew exactly what to say to make me feel like I was the most important person on earth. Back then, I didn't know that people like him existed. I thought narcissists were just vain, loud, self-obsessed celebrities. I didn't know they could be charming, or gentle, or the kind of man who opens your car door and texts you good morning before you even wake up. Ethan swept me off my feet fast. The texts, the gifts, the constant attention, it felt like something out of a romance movie. He said things like, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me," and "I've never loved anyone this deeply." Within weeks, he was planning our future, picking out baby names, calling me his soulmate. Everyone said I was glowing, that I'd finally found the one. And I believed it. But what I didn't realize was that the love-bombing phase is just the opening act. It's the bait. The first red flag was so small, I almost missed it. I was going out for dinner with my best friend, Jessica, and he looked at me with this sad, almost wounded expression. "You're really gonna leave me alone tonight?" he said, like a little boy being abandoned. "I just thought we could have a night in together. But it's fine. Go have fun." I canceled dinner. It didn't seem like a big deal. I mean, relationships are about compromise, right? But it didn't stop there. Next, it was how he didn't like Jessica's energy. Then it was how my family was too involved in our relationship. One by one, the people in my life began to fade out. I didn't even notice at first. I just thought I was prioritizing love. But slowly, without even realizing it, I was becoming isolated, dependent. And every time I questioned something, even gently, he flipped the script. "You're so sensitive. Why do you always assume the worst of me? You're the one causing problems, not me." I remember once, I asked him why he didn't tell me he was meeting his ex for coffee. I didn't accuse. I just asked. He didn't answer me for hours. Then, finally, he looked at me and said, "I can't believe you'd question my loyalty after everything I've done for you. You clearly don't trust me. Maybe I made a mistake choosing you." And just like that, I was apologizing for having feelings. That's the part people don't understand. Narcissists don't yell, not always. They don't hit, not always. They manipulate you in such subtle ways that you begin to doubt your own mind. It's like emotional quicksand. And I was already sinking. I used to be outspoken, confident even. I had opinions, dreams, boundaries. But with Ethan, those parts of me faded, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until I began to wonder if they'd ever existed at all. It was like he held a mirror to my face and twisted the reflection just enough to make me doubt what I saw. One night, I brought up something that had been bothering me. I told him that lately, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. That I didn't know how he was going to react to things anymore. He looked at me, narrowed his eyes, and said, "You're being dramatic again. You always make everything about your feelings. That's exhausting." Then came the classic. "You're imagining things. That never happened." I'd be sure, absolutely sure, that we'd had a certain conversation. That he said something cruel or made a promise he later broke. But he'd deny it with such conviction, such confidence, that eventually, I stopped trusting my own memory. I started recording things in my journal, conversations, events, word for word. Not because I wanted to prove him wrong, but because I needed proof that I wasn't going insane. That's what gaslighting does to you. It doesn't just confuse you. It erases you. And the worst part? He was so charming in public. People adored him. At work, he was the golden boy. At dinner parties, he'd pour wine for my friends, crack jokes, kiss my hand like some old-fashioned gentleman. Then, when we got home, I'd say something simple like, "Could you help me with the dishes?" And he'd scoff. "Why are you always nagging me? Jesus, can't you ever be grateful?" I'd stand there, dish towel in hand, heart in my throat, wondering if I was ungrateful. That's how he kept me trapped, not with chains, but with confusion. I couldn't talk to my friends anymore because, by now, they barely called. I'd either canceled on them too many times or told them I was busy with Ethan. And when I did confide in someone, even just a little, I could see the skepticism on their faces. "But he's so sweet," they'd say. "He seems like such a good guy." And I'd nod, smile, pretend I was lucky. In truth, I was exhausted.
All the time.
Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that settles in your bones when your soul's been worn down. Every day was a performance. Smile at the grocery store clerk. Laugh at Ethan's jokes in front of his coworkers. Dress nice. Say the right things. Be the supportive wife. Inside, I was unraveling. One night, I locked myself in the bathroom just to breathe. Just to have 5 minutes without the tension, the walking on glass feeling. And even then, he stood outside the door, knocking lightly. "Are you really doing this again? You're being so childish, babe." I didn't even cry. I just stared at my own reflection. My eyes were hollow. My skin looked pale. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. But I didn't leave. Not yet. Because somehow, he'd convinced me that I was the problem. That if I just tried harder, things would get better. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The way Ethan punished me wasn't loud. It wasn't physical. It was silence. Cold, calculated silence that could stretch for days. All it took was one wrong look, one word he didn't like, and suddenly he'd vanish, not literally, but emotionally. He would still sit next to me on the couch, but with his back turned. Still sleep in the same bed, but without touching me. Still eat the meals I made, but without saying a word. And the silence wasn't peaceful. It was punishing. I would ask, "Did I do something wrong?" He'd shrug. Or worse, walk away. It drove me insane. I'd sit there replaying every moment from the last few hours, trying to piece together where I'd messed up. Was it the way I disagreed with him at dinner? Or that I forgot to buy almond milk? Or maybe I laughed too loud at someone else's joke? The silence screamed louder than any words could. Eventually, he'd forgive me. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I'd begged enough, apologized enough, cried enough. And he'd act like he was doing me a favor. "You're lucky I love you," he'd say, wrapping his arms around me. "I could never stay mad at you forever." As if he was the saint, and I was the storm. Looking back, I realized that was his way of reestablishing control. The silent treatment was a weapon, a reminder that he held all the emotional power.
But I didn't see that at the time.
All I saw was someone I loved, pulling away, and I just wanted him back. That's what happens when you're trauma bonded. You crave the same person who's hurting you. Their approval becomes your oxygen. I started tiptoeing around every conversation, editing my thoughts before they even left my mouth. I learned which topics were safe and which ones would set him off. And worst of all, I began hiding parts of myself. I stopped painting, even though it used to bring me joy, because he once said, "You're not actually that good at it, babe. It's just a hobby." I stopped playing my favorite music in the car because he'd mock my taste. I stopped wearing red lipstick because he made one offhand comment about how it looked cheap. Bit by bit, I shrunk, until the only version of me that remained was the one he approved of. To everyone else, we looked perfect. We had date nights, matching Instagram smiles. He bought me flowers sometimes, and people said we were couple goals. But they didn't see the way my stomach knotted every time I heard his car pull into the driveway. They didn't see how much of me I had to bury just to keep the peace. Because in Ethan's world, there was only room for one person's needs, one person's voice, one person's truth. And it sure as hell wasn't mine. There's a special kind of fear that comes from not knowing who you're going to come home to. Some days, Ethan would walk through the door, sweep me into his arms, kiss my forehead, and tell me how lucky he was to have me. Other days, he'd barely look at me. He'd slam a cabinet door just a little too hard, toss his keys on the counter, and mutter under his breath. The air would shift, and I'd brace myself. One wrong question. "Rough day at work?" One wrong tone. "Do you want to talk about it?" That's all it would take. He'd explode. Not physically, but emotionally. Why do you always assume I'm in a bad mood? Jesus, can't I just come home without being interrogated? Interrogated. That was the word he used. And I'd apologize. Again. Swallow my feelings. Again. I lived on edge, always scanning the room like a soldier in enemy territory, listening for changes in tone, watching his body language, monitoring his expressions. I became an expert in anticipating his moods. It wasn't love anymore. It was survival. And he was so clever with it. Everything he did, he twisted into something my fault. If I got upset, I was too emotional. If I asked questions, I was insecure. If I needed reassurance, I was clingy. The truth is, I was starving emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And yet I kept trying harder. I cooked his favorite meals. I wore clothes he liked. I laughed at his jokes, even when they were mean. I complimented him in public, praised him in front of his friends. I kept thinking, maybe if I'm just better, he'll love me like he used to. But that version of him, the one who held my hand in the beginning, who looked at me like I was his whole world, he was gone. Or maybe he never existed. Maybe that was the illusion, the hook. And now I was stuck in the loop, trying to earn back a version of him that was never real to begin with. I didn't know it at the time, but I was living in what psychologists call a trauma bond. A cycle of love and punishment, affection and withdrawal. Just enough tenderness to keep me hoping, and just enough cruelty to keep me dependent. It was a masterclass in manipulation. And the saddest part? I wasn't even angry yet. I was still blaming myself. Still thinking I was the one who broke us. Still trying to fix something I didn't even break. There was one night I'll never forget. Not because something violent happened, but because nothing did. And somehow, that silence felt like the deepest kind of betrayal. It was our anniversary. I had planned a quiet dinner at home, candles, his favorite steak, a playlist of songs we used to love in the beginning. I even wore the dress he once said made me look like a dream. He came home late.
No explanation. No flowers.
No gift. Not even a happy anniversary. I stood there in the kitchen, smiling like an idiot, holding a wine glass in my hand. My heart was pounding, like it knew what was coming. He looked at the table, then at me, and said, "You know I had a long day. You really expect me to pretend tonight is special?" He walked straight past me, sat on the couch, turned on the TV. I stood there, the candlelight flickering against the tears that filled my eyes. My throat burned. My hands shook. But I said nothing, because by then I had learned speaking up would only make things worse. If I cried, he'd roll his eyes. If I asked for anything, he'd twist it. If I showed pain, he'd accuse me of being manipulative. So I just stood there. And slowly, I put the food away, washed the dishes, wiped off the table. And with every motion, a tiny part of me disappeared. That night, I stared at the ceiling while he snored beside me, and I realized something terrifying. I didn't even know who I was anymore. I had become this shell, a woman too scared to speak, too drained to fight, too broken to leave. And somehow, the world still thought we were the perfect couple. People envied us. They saw him open my car door. They saw his hand on my lower back at parties. They heard him brag about how amazing his wife was. No one saw the nights like that one. No one saw the way I disappeared behind my smile. He didn't need to raise his voice to hurt me. He just needed to withhold love. And when someone makes you beg for the very thing they promised to give freely, that's not love. That's power, control, enslavement. And I was completely under his spell. I don't remember what made me pick up that book. It was just sitting on the shelf at the library, Psychological Abuse and Recovery, in plain bold letters. I wasn't looking for it. I didn't even think I needed it. But something about the title made my chest tighten. I picked it up, flipped to a chapter called Covert Narcissists and Emotional Control. And there it was, my life, in black and white text. The love bombing, the silent treatment, the isolation, the constant confusion, the guilt, the subtle digs, the fake charm, the never-ending gaslighting. I sat there frozen, tears falling silently onto the pages. It was like someone had followed me around for the past 3 years and decided to write a manual about my marriage. For the first time, I had a name for what was happening to me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't broken. I was being abused, not with bruises,
Not with fists.
but with words, silence, fear, and manipulation. That was the moment the fog began to lift. Not all at once, but enough for a small voice inside me, one I hadn't heard in a long time, to whisper, "This isn't love." I started reading more, watching videos, joining forums where other women shared stories that echoed mine so closely it was eerie. They had lived my life. They had married perfect men. They had smiled in public and cried in secret. And they had survived. I wasn't there yet, but for the first time, I believed that maybe I could be. I remember coming home that night with the book tucked in my bag like it was contraband. Ethan noticed the shift in me right away. "Why are you so quiet?" he asked. I shrugged. "Just tired." But he knew. They always know. When you start waking up, even just a little, they feel the ground shift beneath their feet. He got more attentive the next day. Brought home flowers. Took me out for dinner. Told me I was beautiful. That's the cycle. Abuse, then reward. Hurt, then heal, just enough to keep you hanging on. But this time, I saw it. I didn't fall for it. And that terrified him. I could see it in his eyes. For the first time, he was the one unsure. And that's when I knew. The spell was breaking. Something changed in me after that night. It was small at first, like a tiny ember flickering back to life inside my chest. But once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. Once the blindfold slips, even for a second, the world never looks the same again. Ethan noticed right away. He tried to regain control the only way he knew how, by pretending to be the man he used to be. The good version. The one I fell in love with. Suddenly, he was offering to cook dinner. Picking up little gifts just because. Telling me I didn't need to work so hard, that I should relax more. At first, I wanted to believe it. I almost did. But I kept hearing the voices of the women I'd read about in the support forums. Women who said this was the most dangerous part of the cycle. The honeymoon phase of narcissistic abuse. They don't change. They just repackage the abuse with a bow. And this time, I watched it happen like I was on the outside looking in. Like I was studying a performance I'd seen before but never recognized for what it was. I stopped reacting. I stopped trying to prove myself. I stopped apologizing for things I didn't do. And he started unraveling. I remember one morning, he asked why I wasn't wearing the necklace he bought me. I said calmly, "I just didn't feel like it today." His whole face tightened. "What's going on with you lately?" he snapped. "You've changed. You're acting cold. Distant." I met his eyes and, for the first time in years, didn't flinch. "I'm just tired of pretending," I said. It was like I'd slapped him. That was the moment he knew I wasn't under his spell anymore. And that's when things got worse, not physically but psychologically. He started flipping faster, from kindness to cruelty, from romantic gestures to cutting remarks. "You think you're so enlightened now, huh? You're not as strong as you think. No one else would put up with you." But the words didn't land the way they used to, because I'd already begun the process of reclaiming myself.
Piece by piece.
I'd started therapy. Quietly. Without telling him. I'd opened a separate bank account. Started saving, little by little. I wasn't ready to leave yet. But I was preparing. And for the first time in years, I had hope. Not the fantasy kind he used to sell me, but real hope. The kind that's built on truth, not illusion. The kind that says, I am not crazy. I am not weak. And I am not staying. Narcissists are masters of image. And Ethan? He had built a whole persona around being the perfect husband. To everyone else, he was charming, successful, articulate, the kind of man who remembered birthdays, helped old ladies carry groceries, and never raised his voice in public. But behind closed doors, the cracks had started to show. He was getting sloppy. When I stopped reacting the way I used to, stopped apologizing, stopped crying on cue, he began pushing harder. More jabs. More accusations. His charm faded faster with each passing day. You're sabotaging this marriage. You think you're better than me now. No therapist is going to fix what's wrong with you. And when I didn't flinch, he'd double down. He started picking fights in public, small things at first, questioning my memory in front of friends, making jokes at my expense during dinner. One night, at a friend's party, he cut me off mid-sentence and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "God, you love to talk, don't you?" People laughed awkwardly. I laughed too. I had to. But inside, I was boiling. Because I wasn't the same woman who used to absorb the humiliation and turn it inward. I was watching him now, documenting his behaviors in my mind like a scientist studying a predator. And the more I detached emotionally, the more unstable he became. He'd corner me in the hallway, whisper threats disguised as concern. "You're going to ruin both our lives. You'll never survive on your own. Don't forget who you'd be without me." But I had forgotten. I didn't know who I was before him, but I was determined to find her again. And I think he sensed that. That terrified him more than anything. Because when a narcissist feels you slipping from their grip, they panic. That's when the mask slips. That's when the real monster shows. And one night, the night that changed everything, the monster came out in full. It wasn't physical. It was psychological warfare. And it pushed me to a breaking point I didn't see coming. But it also became the moment I finally realized I wasn't safe anymore. It was a Thursday night. I remember because the sky was this heavy, bruised shade of blue, like the world was holding its breath. We had argued earlier. Something small, again. I had asked why he hadn't told me he was going out after work, and that was all it took.
He didn't yell.
He didn't slam anything. Instead, he went cold. That freezing kind of silence that strips the air out of the room. He walked past me like I wasn't there. Ate dinner without speaking. Didn't look up once. I told myself to stay calm. I had learned how to survive these silences. But that night something in me cracked. After dinner, I sat down across from him and said quietly, "I don't think I can do this anymore." He didn't even blink. "Do what?" he asked.
This. Us.
"The way you treat me." That's when it happened. The moment I'll never forget. He looked up, slowly, and smiled. But it wasn't kind. It was cold. Full. "You're nothing without me," he said. "No one else will ever want you. You'll fall apart the second I'm gone. You need me, you just don't want to admit it." And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. He believed it. He genuinely thought I couldn't survive without him. That he had destroyed enough of me to keep me dependent forever. And for a long time he was right. But not anymore. That was the moment something inside me finally shattered, not from pain, but from clarity. This wasn't love. This was psychological enslavement. I stood up slowly. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't.
"You're wrong," I said.
"I don't need you. And I'm done." He laughed. That hollow, mocking kind of laugh that echoes off the walls and leaves you feeling cold. "You'll come crawling back," he said. "They always do." But I didn't. That night, I slept in the guest room with the door locked. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just stared at the ceiling, wide awake, repeating one sentence over and over in my mind. "You are not powerless anymore." And the next morning I started making plans. Real plans.
To escape. I didn't leave the next day.
Or the day after. Because leaving someone like Ethan isn't like walking out of a normal relationship. It's like escaping a cult. A prison of the mind. You have to move carefully. Quietly. Because when a narcissist realizes they're losing control, that's when they become truly dangerous. So I played the role. I smiled. I cooked. I laughed at his terrible jokes. I made the bed. I kissed his cheek. And at night, when he snored beside me, I'd stare at the ceiling and map my exit like a general planning for war. I opened a hidden savings account. Just a few dollars at a time. Enough to avoid suspicion. I contacted a therapist from a number he wouldn't recognize. Booked sessions during my lunch breaks. I started reconnecting with the friends I had pushed away, the ones who had once loved me and didn't know I had been buried under years of emotional manipulation. I researched legal aid, read about protection orders, documented everything. The lies, the threats, the subtle emotional abuse. I had texts, voice memos, journal entries, all saved in a folder labeled insurance. Because I knew if he ever tried to paint me as unstable, and he would, I needed proof. I even packed a go bag. Just in case. Just in case one night, things turned. He must have felt it.
The shift.
Because suddenly, he turned up the charm again. Flowers on a random Tuesday. A surprise dinner reservation. Telling me how good I'd been lately. I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled. Because now, I wasn't reacting out of fear. I was preparing out of power. Every move he made, every lie, every tactic, only made me more certain that I had to leave. For good. And then, one morning, I got a call. My therapist, the one I'd been secretly seeing, had found a women's support group. Survivors of narcissistic abuse. They met every Wednesday. Quietly. Privately.
Safely.
She said, "You don't have to do this alone anymore." And something in me finally broke.
Not in a bad way.
In a freeing way. For the first time in years, I felt like, maybe, just maybe, I wasn't trapped. I had options. I had allies. I had a way out. I wasn't free yet, but I could see the exit sign, and I was walking toward it. It wasn't dramatic. No suitcases thrown into a cab. No screaming in the rain. No final showdown with Ethan shouting after me. It was quiet, intentional, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. That morning, he kissed me on the forehead before leaving for work. Told me he'd be home late. I smiled and said, "Okay." Then I locked the door behind him, leaned against the frame, and cried. Not from sadness. From relief. Because I knew that was the last time I'd ever see him. I had already signed a short-term lease on a small apartment across town. Paid in cash. No forwarding address. My friend Rachel, the one Ethan always said was too loud, was waiting for me with her truck. We packed what I needed, clothes, documents, a few family photos. I left everything else behind. All the gifts, the expensive jewelry, the memories I had clung to for so long. They weren't mine. They were part of the cage. And I wasn't taking the cage with me. I remember driving away, looking at our house in the rearview mirror. That beautiful, pristine house where my soul had nearly died. I expected to feel guilt. Or fear. But I didn't. I felt light. Empty, but in a clean slate kind of way. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared of what would happen if he called. Or what he'd say if I didn't answer. Or how he'd spin it all to make me the villain. Because now I knew the truth. I didn't owe him anything. He took years of my life. He turned love into a weapon. He taught me to hate myself just enough to depend on his version of reality.
But he didn't win.
Because I left. Not just the house. Not just the marriage. I left the narrative he built. And that's the real escape, when you stop believing the lies they fed you and start remembering who you are. I didn't sleep much that first night in the new apartment. The bed was too quiet. The silence was unfamiliar. But I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. The first few weeks were the hardest. Not because I missed him, I didn't. Not really. What I missed was the idea of him. The man he pretended to be in the beginning. The one who looked at me like I was the only person in the world. But once you realize that love was a mask, you stop grieving the person. And you start grieving yourself. I had to mourn the woman I used to be. The one who laughed freely. The one who painted on Sundays. The one who didn't question every thought, every feeling, every word that left her mouth. For the first time in years, I could choose what to eat without criticism. Play the music I liked. Take a walk without having to text where I was going. But freedom is strange when you've been psychologically caged for so long. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. Simple choices, what to wear, what to cook, who to talk to, felt overwhelming. Because for so long, every part of me was filtered through him. What would Ethan say? Would this upset him? Is this too much? Too loud? Too bright? Too bold? I had to unlearn everything. My therapist told me it would take time. That narcissistic abuse isn't something you just get over. It's not like leaving a bad relationship. It's like waking up from a long, manipulative dream and realizing you don't know who you are without it. So I started small. One boundary. One brave conversation. One morning where I didn't check my phone the second I opened my eyes. I started journaling again. Not to track the gaslighting, but to write to myself. To hear my own voice again. I joined that support group my therapist mentioned. Sat in a circle of strangers who felt like long-lost sisters. We shared our stories, our shame, our fears, our healing. And little by little, I realized I wasn't broken. I had been wounded, but I wasn't weak. In fact, surviving what I did and walking away from it made me stronger than I ever knew. I used to think I was powerless. Now I know I was surviving the whole time.
And
Now, I'm starting to live. They always come back. That's what the women in my support group warned me that. That's what my therapist said. And sure enough, 3 months after I left, Ethan reached out. It started with a text.
simple.
Polite.
Hey,
Just checking in. Hope you're okay. I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart didn't race. My stomach didn't drop. It just went quiet. Because I knew what this was. It wasn't love. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't growth. It was bait. A test to see if I was still reachable. Still vulnerable. Still under his spell.
I didn't respond.
So he tried harder. Emails. Voicemails. A letter slipped under my apartment door. Flowers sent anonymously. Each message carefully crafted to sound sincere. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I've changed. I'm in therapy now. Let's talk. Just one coffee. And maybe a part of me, the part that still remembered the girl I used to be, wanted to believe him. But then I'd remember. The silent treatments, the gaslighting. The nights I cried in the bathroom with the faucet running so he wouldn't hear. He didn't want me back. He wanted control. So I blocked every number. I told my landlord, my friends, my therapist. I took steps to protect my peace, because now I knew how quickly peace could be shattered. And I wasn't willing to give him one more piece of me. That's the thing about narcissists, they don't grieve you. They grieve the power they had over you. And when that power is gone, they panic. But I wasn't panicking anymore. I was rising. Each day without contact was another stitch in the fabric of my new life. A life where I wasn't monitored, or silenced, or made to feel like I was too much or not enough. I didn't need closure. I needed freedom. And I had finally claimed it. There's something sacred about hearing your own voice again after years of being silenced. Not the voice you used to keep the peace. Not the one you softened or filtered or cut short so someone else wouldn't feel threatened. But your real voice. The one you buried to survive. I remember the first time I used it again. Really used it. I was sitting in my support group and it was my turn to share. I almost passed. The old version of me, the trained, careful one, wanted to stay quiet. But I didn't. I took a deep breath. My hands shook. My heart pounded. But I spoke. I told them everything. The manipulation. The erasure. The loneliness that felt like a cage inside my own home. I cried. And no one looked away. No one told me I was overreacting. No one rolled their eyes. No one made me question if it had really happened that way. They just listened. Held space. Nodded. And I felt seen. Like I wasn't a ghost anymore. I started speaking more after that. In therapy, in casual conversations, even out loud to myself at home. It was awkward at first. My voice felt unfamiliar. My truth felt raw. But I kept going. I wrote in journals. I recorded myself reading poetry. I said affirmations in the mirror, even when they felt silly. And little by little, I came back. I started painting again. Big, bold strokes. Bright colors. Unapologetic mess. I danced in my living room to music he would have mocked. I wore the red lipstick he said made me look cheap, and felt gorgeous. I stopped explaining myself. Stopped apologizing for taking up space. I took myself out to dinner, just me, and sat there without pretending to be busy on my phone. I looked around. I existed. And for the first time in years, I felt safe in my own body. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Fully. Loudly. Authentically. And no one would ever take that from me again. I used to think freedom would come with fireworks. A dramatic final goodbye. Maybe a big speech where I'd reclaim my worth and he'd realize what he lost. But that's not how healing works. Freedom doesn't shout. It whispers. It comes in the quiet moments, when you realize you're not waiting for a text anymore. When your laughter is real. When you look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back at you. I was no longer the woman who tiptoed around someone else's anger. No longer the one who molded herself into whatever shape he needed to feel big. I was me. Whole. Wounded, yes, but healing. I still have scars. Emotional ones. Some days I flinch at certain tones. Some nights I wake up from dreams where I'm still trapped in that house, still pleading for understanding. But now I know how to ground myself. I know how to breathe through it. I know the truth.
He didn't break me.
He tried. He chipped away at me for years, using charm, silence, fear, and doubt. He weaponized love and made me believe I was too much, too needy, too sensitive, too everything. But in the end, he failed. Because I found the strength to walk away. And walking away didn't make me weak. It made me powerful. To anyone listening, if any of this feels familiar, please hear me. You're not crazy. You're not imagining it. You're not too sensitive. You are being conditioned to question your reality, and that is not love. Narcissists don't need fists to destroy you. They use your own mind against you. But healing is possible, and freedom begins with truth. If you feel trapped, speak up. Reach out. Find support. Even if there are no visible bruises, the wounds are real. And you don't have to suffer in silence. You are not alone. You are not powerless. You are not broken. You are worthy of real love. The kind that doesn't punish, confuse, or control. Just love. Gentle.
Kind.
Honest. And if no one's told you today, I'm proud of you. For surviving. For listening to your gut. For still being here. If this story spoke to you, please share your experience in the comments. Your voice might help someone else realize they're not crazy, they're being controlled. Subscribe for more real, raw, and healing stories, because awareness is the first step toward freedom. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. You might just save a life.